God put you together with your husband. He knows what your interests are. He knows what your experience is, and he knows what his experience is too, right? And so it's like we need to trust God that he saw all that, and that he saw what our future would look like together, and how those traits, those experiences, and the interests would end up complementing each other.
Welcome back to the podcast. We are so glad that you're joining us today for this discussion on new wife comparison, or just wife comparison, or just comparison, whatever you want to talk about.
Like originally it was new wife, and I was like, that season wasn't very specific, but I do remember comparing myself to other wives. So
I think it's just the idea of comparison as a wife, like in marriage, you know, as a mom, as a adult female in the workforce. I mean, whatever it is, we all like have that. But I think when it comes to marriage, there is kind of just some things that do come on us that I don't even think we're fully aware of. And then I think in the Christian community, there's kind of a whole nother set of expectations and things that I don't even think we realize are there, but they are. And they can affect us in a negative way if we're not careful and we don't realize what's going on. So yeah, just kind of talking about that.
Yeah, and thinking about a topic like this, and I think this is true for comparison in general, but it's like you can't be everyone's everything. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when I've compared myself to other people, it's like sometimes it's stuff that I enjoy and stuff that I actually would want to be good at. But then other times it's just like, oh, this person is really good at, I mean, this is not a real example, but it's like, oh, I wish I could sew clothes better. Or, you know, I wish I was, you know, more good at like more sportsy or something. And it's like just wanting to be everything. It's not even possible to be all those things at once, because we each have certain gifts and certain callings that God has put in our lives, and those are specific. And if we get too distracted by all these other things, we won't be able to walk in our calling as who we need to be or who we should be for our husbands as a wife, because we're going to be so distracted with, oh, well, what if they want this and this and this? And then it's like you're so spread out, you know?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I mean, it's what they tell you in marketing is if you're starting any kind of, you know, YouTube channel or blog or anything like that, they always say niche down, right? And maybe that advice isn't across the board, but I think a lot of times there is this concept of, what are you offering? You're not all things to all people. What are you offering? Why do people come to you? Mm-hmm. And in a strange way, that's kind of like a good segue into being a wife. And it's not like, what does your husband come to you for? But it's like just being who you are and knowing, like you said, what your strengths are, what you contribute, what your passions are, I think is really important to kind of realize that. And it might be a journey to find out what that is, but yeah, realizing that you're not going to be like fantastic at everything. Like and you don't even need to want to be great at everything. Like there are some people that are really good at certain things, and I'm like, that's great. I don't even want to be good at that.
Yeah.
Like I really don't even want to be good at that. And it's because I'm just not wired that way. That's not really where my passions lie. Mm-hmm. And then vice versa. There's things that I love doing that other girls are like, I could care less. And so it's just really important to kind of realize that we're all operating in different ways. And, you know, no one else is married to your husband. Hopefully.
Right?
Right? So it's like you might be loving like this one girl's Instagram feed and thinking she's the greatest wife ever. It's always Instagram, right? The squares. But you might be like, oh my gosh, she's amazing. I need to be just like her. But you know, who she's married to is not who you're married to. And so maybe that dynamic is going to look different for you, because you may really feel like the pressure to cook, but maybe your husband really likes to cook. Yeah. That does happen, right?
like every once in a blue moon, that does happen.
Right. I mean, usually guys, it's like there's like that one dish or like a couple dishes that they're like, oh, this is my thing that I do.
Honestly, I think Brian likes to cook more than me.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, there you go. There you have it right here, folks.
I'm so unique.
She's so unique. One in a million. But it's true. And then like I actually love cooking. Like when I started dating Jeff did all the cooking. It was mainly stir fries, and it was great. And as soon as I got married, like, I don't feel like I had much pressure put on me. My mom is an excellent cook, so there was a little bit of that.
Yeah, my mom too.
My mom's a great cook, but I literally just developed such a love for it. Like, I love food, I love flavors, I love spices, I love pairing things together, and just, I love it so much. It's like a creative outlet almost in a way. But the thing is, like, that's coming from an internal passion, whereas, you know, like something else that maybe I have no passion for, if I try to keep up with that, I'm just going to burn out. And it's like, why? Why would I even try that?
Yeah, and that's such a good point, because I was thinking about this and like not being everything for everybody, and it made me think of sometimes the interest that you see or the gifts that you see other wives operating in, and maybe they're like really good at planning or something, right? And you're like, I wish I was a planner. And I think a lot of times when I've been in that and I think about like, well, what was their life experience like growing up? Because what if that girl, like in her family, she had to be the planner, you know? It's like, what if like she was an older sibling and, you know, she had to have certain skills to develop when she was younger, you know? So sometimes it's just about, like you said, maybe what your mom was good at. Like, she was a cook and my mom was a cook too. And so maybe we picked up on that, and then someone who really wasn't in that sort of household, like they don't have that. So think about maybe like what other people's life looked like, and that's maybe why they're good at it. It's not just about, you know, them being better or something like that, or you being worse because you don't know all those skills. And then another thing, it's like just about interest too. Like maybe you just have different interests than other people. And God put you together with your husband, and he knows that. He knows what your interests are. He knows what your experience is, and he knows what his experience is too, right? And so it's like we need to trust God that he saw all that, and that he saw what our future would look like together, and how those traits, those experiences, and the interests would end up complementing each other, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I mean, I think I always grew up thinking like, oh God, you're going to give me a husband that can handle all the finances, because I hate that. And so I just always had this thought that that was what was going to happen. And Jeff is very good with finances. He handles all the investing. He handles our properties. He handles taxes, which I despise. And so he's very, very good at that. But early on in our marriage, we both kind of were ignoring the day-to-day like budgetary needs of our finances. And so I finally just decided like, okay, I'm going to do this. Like, I felt like there was a need, and I needed to kind of step in the gap and kind of serve my marriage this way. And so I downloaded Dave Ramsey's Every Dollar app, and I actually use it to this day, and it's been amazing. But
Shout out to Dave.
Shout out to Dave. Hey, Dave. But I love it now. Like, I literally actually love running the budget, like just the normal everyday budget. It's like something that kind of developed in me once I said yes to the need that was there in my marriage, right? And again, Jeff is very good with finances. It was just, he also has a lot going on in his mind. So I think sometimes asking yourself like, okay, I didn't see myself doing this before, but God, if this is something I need to do, if this is a gap I need to fill, a skill I need to learn, then being willing to kind of step in that gap and learn that skill and take over that responsibility to actually serve our marriage. And if you do that with God's help, like, you're going to actually grow a passion for it. And I actually love it. And I really enjoy the fact that that's what I get to do. Like, I wouldn't really want to hand it over, to be honest. I'm like, no, I got it. And so I think just kind of also sometimes we put expectations on ourselves and on our marriages and our future marriages of like, this is what it's going to look like, and this is what he's going to do, and this is what I'm going to do. And it's okay to, you know thyself, but it's also, I think, important to kind of have an open hand and open heart and just be like, God, like, what, like you said, he knows your husband, he knows you. God, what would you have me do? Where would you have me grow? Because we're meant to grow into our marriages, right? You're not like, you say I do, and then it's like, oh, I've got this figured out. It's like, no. You are a seed in the ground now. Like, you have so much growth ahead of us, and it's an amazing thing, but I think we just have to be willing to take that journey and grow and see maybe where we might need to grow in areas we didn't think of before.
Yeah, it's true. And I think a lot of times, I mean, I know guys are like this as well, but I think a lot of times girls can be so hard on themselves, and expect things out of themselves that their husband doesn't even expect. And what I mean by that is there was a lot of time in the beginning of me and Brian's marriage where I would feel really bad that the house wasn't as clean as I wanted it to be. And I was like, oh man, he probably is so bothered by this and everything. And then we were reading through a marriage book. It was called His Needs, Her Needs. And like in that book, there's some sort of activity where the men write down, they give you a list. So they give you a list of things that like are generally important to men and a list that are generally important to women. And then you number it from 1 to 5, like 1 being most important. And then at the end, or it might be 10, like 10 being the least important. And Brian put like taking care of the house as one of the least important for me. Because it was like, what do you find most important with your spouse? And what do you find least important? And like, I thinking this whole time that this was super important to him and I needed to, try to maintain the house better. And then we did this and I was like, oh, this isn't that important to him. Like what's really important to Brian is like quality time and like having hobbies that we share together that we can do together. And so, and then another example I think of is like sports. So Brian loves Dolphins. Miami Dolphins football. And I was like, man, I wish I could be one of those wives that, just put on the jersey and like knew all the terms and like was super sportsy. And then me and Brian were talking about it one day and he was saying, I was like, I wish I was more of a sportsy wife. And he's like, I don't really want you to be a sportsy wife. Like, not because he doesn't want me to be there with him, but it's like, I kind of like that you're like not super like, oh, let's go Dolphins, like that kind of thing.
Like, I don't know what sound they make.
Yeah, that sounded right.
Yeah, there we go.
And some guys do like that,
Yeah.
But like maybe try to figure out what's actually important to them,
right.
Because a lot of times we can just have so many expectations of like, they want me to be a planner. They want me to do this. And again, it's a relationship. It's not like a job description. So, you don't have to approach it like that. But if you're curious of like, or if you're feeling condemnation, or if you're feeling like you're not meeting a mark for your husband, it's like, maybe you're just holding a super high standard from what they're actually wanting out of marriage or what they're wanting in a wife. And you might come to find that you're having a lot of higher expectations on yourself than they are.
Absolutely. And when we do hold ourselves to such high expectations, it tends to make the other person feel like they're not enough either. Like if we constantly feel like I'm failing as a wife, I'm not doing enough, we spend all our time trying to take care of everything and we don't spend any time with him, like it's going to make him probably feel a bit like a failure as well. Like, oh, I should be doing more. Like I'm not enough. It's kind of like, gracious people tend to be more gracious to other people, and then people who are harder on themselves tend to be harder on other people. And so we'll tend to be harder on our husbands, and they'll also like take that attitude as like, well, if you feel like you're behind, I must be really behind, right? And so I think sometimes giving ourselves grace to grow into the journey and to grow into who we're meant to be as a wife, and once you bring kids in, as a parent, oh my goodness. But when you allow yourself room to grow into that, you actually give your spouse permission to grow into that as well, because that's another thing with it, is that you're both going to grow, right? Like you're trying to learn what being a wife looks like because you don't know until you start living in it for a while. Like you just don't. You're not going to know. People can prepare you, but you just don't know what it's like until you're in it. And then also no one can prepare you for your husband, right? No one can prepare you for your marriage. It's going to be unique. But the longer like you're in it, you kind of start to grow into that role and kind of like who you are in that role and what God has for you in that role. And you kind of like find yourself, and it just becomes easier. But we have to realize too that like they're on that journey as well. So just like we are not, like we haven't arrived, it's like neither have they. And so it's just really important to give grace and to give ourselves grace, because we both need to feel the freedom, like both of us in the marriage need to feel the freedom to be like, I'm still trying to figure this out and I'm still growing, and that's okay. We can actually have fun and enjoy being married before we feel like we've reached the places that we're supposed to be at as husbands and wives, right? That's why you marry your best friend.
Yeah.
Because you're supposed to be best friends, and you're supposed to just enjoy that friendship as you both kind of become these people that were always on the inside of you, but now they're kind of becoming more refined and more unwrapped and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And when, like, you're talking about friendship, and it kind of makes me think of like a history that you have with them, because I think a lot of times when we get married, we expect ourselves to develop all these new traits, and we're like, oh, well, they're going to want this and this out of me. It's like, you know, as far as planning, like, I am not a huge planner, right? And I could be upset that I'm with myself and be like, oh, well, Brian's going to be really upset if I don't do this. But unless you were in an arranged marriage or something, most of the time you knew a person a good while before you got married to them, right? Mm-hmm. Like, your husband knew you. He knew what your strengths were. He knew what your interests were. He knew like Brian knew for me. I wasn't a huge planner. Like, I'm not like someone who makes an itinerary and is very like set in stone kind of person. And he still wanted to marry me. He asked, you know.
After all that, he still wanted to marry.
It's like, they know your spouse, you know,
Yeah.
whether you're a husband or a wife, like, your spouse knew, for at least for those sorts of things, your gifts and stuff, a lot of who you are already. And they still wanted to be with you, you know? So I think instead of us trying to develop all these new qualities and having all this pressure, realize that, like, that they chose you just the way you are. And if you're not super, like, if you're not sportsy, if you're not a planner, if you're not, you know, really good at, I don't know, keeping the house super clean or whatever, or growing garden of herbs or something like that, like, they know all that going into it a lot of the time. And so there doesn't need to be a huge pressure of all of a sudden, oh, they're not going to be interested in me anymore because I don't have all those qualities, you know?
Exactly. And, you know, marriage is a journey. Like,
Yeah.
It really is such a journey, whether you're looking to your marriage in the future, or you've been married for a little bit, or you've been married for a while. Like, it's still a journey. Jeff and I are coming up on, this fall, we're coming up on 8 years, which I know for a lot of people that's still really low. But for us, it kind of just feels like we've always been married at this point. But also, there's still so much that we want to grow in. Mm-hmm. And we keep having to remind ourselves when we get into a situation where we feel guilty, or we feel condemnation for, like, I should have known better, I should have done that better. It's like, okay, no, I'll learn, but it's okay. I'm still on this journey with you. And I love in the Lord of the Rings when Gandalf comes to find Bilbo. And he says, he comes up to Bilbo and he just says, I'm looking for someone to go on an adventure with me. And it's very hard to find anyone. And I feel like that is literally the invitation of God for our lives, but then also I think for marriage as well. We see that a lot with our purpose and with our lives, but for some reason we think marriage is like, I just got to get it together like as quickly as possible. And it's like, no, that's not what it is. It's the adventure. It's a huge part of the adventure. Your adventure truly, like, takes a new twist when marriage enters that chapter. When that chapter comes, hold on, because the adventure is about to explode. And that is what this is. It's a teammate to go on this adventure with you. And so the adventure doesn't stop. The growth doesn't stop. The journey ahead doesn't stop. It's just now you're teamed up with someone who's actually on this journey with you. And I think when we shift our perspective to look at it that way, it really takes a lot of the pressure off to be so, you know, perfect, or to be like, oh, we got to get it together really quickly because everyone at church is going to know we had a fight. It's like, no, like, that's not what marriage is all about. It's about the journey. And I mean, the crazier the journey, the crazier the emotions are probably going to come up. You know what I'm saying? Like, trust me, you know, going to Disney World in Florida was a different experience than when we hiked mountains in Nepal. And I can tell you, it was not a pretty sight in Nepal. It was rough. It was hard. We weren't talking to each other very much. We weren't mad, but we were just like trying to breathe. And like that's life, you know. It's gonna be different. And so you just have to be aware of that, because the enemy wants nothing more than to just condemn you and make you feel like you're failing. So why try, right?
Yeah, that kind of makes me think of like how movies, they're never really about the couple that's together already going on any sort of adventure. Like when you think about movies, it's always people meeting, and then like the end of the story is when they get together. That's like the final. And so maybe it's that feeling of that urgency of like when you get married, you need to have it all together. It might be because a lot of the times the stories that we read, the movies that we watch, the adventure is always before.
Yeah.
And so we think, oh, this is the end, as
Yeah.
in like, oh, I need to be perfected at this point. I think there just needs to be more movies.
It's so true. My goodness.
What,
Yeah.
like, can somebody, if you know of a movie where it's like a couple that's together, that's
Yeah.
doing something awesome together, that's not like in the middle of some sort of fight or something, like a couple that's happy and they're going on an adventure, like what movie is that? Do we have one?
I don't know. Let us know in the
Yeah.
comments. If you've
But-
got a movie like that, I can't think of one.
Yeah, that's funny. But I was also thinking about with this, how women's expectations and kind of like our standards are so different than men's standards. And like when I was younger, it was kind of funny for me to ask guys, like, what do you think is like cute, like outfits or something? And it was always so different with women than men. Like women always loved high-rise shorts.
Yes.
And men are like, I don't like high-rise shorts. And maybe you don't fall into that category.
So true. It's like I'll be like, Jeff, this woman is gorgeous, and like he's like, yeah, but then like, but someone
Right?
else that I don't, I'm like, oh, she's, and he's like, no, I think she's attractive, and I'm like, what is it?
What is it?
I don't get it. Like we girls see it quite
So
differently.
So here's my point with that. Is I was thinking about like a lot of the times what women compare themselves to on social media, and I wrote some of it down. It's like, oh, making sourdough bread, or oh, having an herb garden, or keeping the house perfectly clean, or like always having your nails done. We as women look at that and we're like, oh my goodness, she's so put together. But men, it's like funny because Brian, I've talked to him about like eyelashes. And he's like, I don't even notice when women have mascara on. Like, it's funny because if I don't wear mascara to work, I'm like, oh, people are going to think I look so tired. But guys just don't think like women in a lot of these ways. And so I guess my point is, again, well, I'm going somewhere with this. It's just like the thought of, realizing that women might be putting emphasis on other things than men are. And a lot of times it's stuff that's like harder. It's like, oh, I need to make sourdough bread every week. It's like that takes so much time. You have to learn everything. And so I asked Brian, I was like, what do you feel like is actually important to you in a wife? And what's awesome about the things that he mentioned is it's not really stuff that takes time, that's like an outward thing. It's stuff that you develop as a person internally that kind of sticks with you. He said faithfulness, being supportive, like kind and like complimentary with your words, like in how you talk, being genuine, being loving. And it's like when I listened to that list, it was like these are things that like we develop just with spending time with God or just in our lives. It's not all these outward things that are so hard to maintain. Like I think about like, oh, I need to maintain this herb garden. I need to maintain my house. And it's like,
Dreaded herb garden.
like keeping your house clean is important.
It is,
But it's not like, it's not what a husband is probably going to look at and be like, oh, she's either a good wife or not because of how clean the house is.
It's like if there's other more internal issues, then it's easier to notice the dirty house or the other thing.
That's true, yeah.
But I think, that makes so much sense. And it really comes down to, like what you were saying, it's not about trying to be the perfect wife or to be a wife in general. You are a wife, right? If you're married, we're wives, right? Like I can't just decide like I don't feel like a wife today. It's like, no, I'm a wife, And so I think, like you said, a lot of this stuff needs to come from the inside of our hearts, which we just did an episode last week about this exact thing. So check that out, the fake faith one. But it's the same concept. It's like you're not trying to be a wife, you are a wife. So just kind of getting in touch with who you are, who God made you to be, those attributes on the inside of you, like you said. And then those things will start coming out, and then you'll feel where the Holy Spirit is leading you. Like, hey, pay more attention to this, or hey, I want you to spend time on this, or hey, I want you to stop spending time on this, and then he'll kind of guide you and direct you on how best to live your life and your story and your marriage. But it's got to come from that inner place, because the more we try to become something we already are, the more frustrated we're going to be. And we just have to stop comparing our story to everyone else's story and just realize, all right, I'm living it, right? I am in these chapters right now. I'm living it. I'm the main character. This is happening. So what am I going to do, right? I can't wait to become something that I already am. I need to just start living my life right now.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, no matter what stage of life you're in,
Wife, I love that.
Stage of wife or life, we just need to stop giving ourselves such a hard time. It's going to be okay. No two wives are the same, just like no two husbands are the same, and no two marriages are the same.
Yeah.
So just let go of the condemnation and the comparison, and I think we're all going to grow into our stories much more. So
Yeah.
if you enjoyed this episode, then be sure and like it and subscribe to our channel so that you can see all of the great episodes that we have coming your way very soon.
And if you didn't know, we're also on Instagram and Facebook, so check us out on there. And until next week, remember
To have courage.
and be kind.